the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am honoured to rise today to pay tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, whose passing is mourned by citizens of Canada, the Commonwealth, and the realms, as well as millions of people around the world. Her Majesty the Queen visited my community of Cambridge twice, once in the summer of 1959 and again as part of an extended tour of Ontario in 1973, where she presented a pin at Riverside Park to the then Mayor of Cambridge, Claudette Miller. As Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence, I would also like to address the special relationship Her Majesty the Queen had with the Canadian Armed Forces in her role as Commander-in-Chief. Even before ascending to the throne, Her Majesty enjoyed a special relationship with Canada's military. In 1947, then Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth was appointed Colonel-in-Chief of the 48th Highlanders of Canada and the Régiment de la Chaude de l'Air, and once she became Queen of Canada, that relationship even deepened through her role as Canadian Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief. Over and above this role, Her Majesty was also made Captain General, Colonel-in-Chief, and Air Commander-in-Chief of 16 Canadian military units and branches. During 22 official tours of Canada and during ceremonies abroad, the Queen honored our military by visiting bases, visiting Royal Canadian naval ships, presiding over military ceremonies, laying wreaths at commemorative sites, presenting military colors, inspecting troops, meeting with veterans, and attending commemorative ceremonies, including the rededication of the Canadian National Vimy Memorial in 2007 and the Royal Canadian Navy Centenary in Halifax in 2010. The Queen had a personal knowledge of military life, having been the first woman in her family to serve in the Army full-time as a truck driver and a mechanic. She had a deep affection and respect for our military, which was clear from her interactions with them. Just months ago, during inspection of a Royal Regiment of Canadian Artillery serving as the Queen's Guard at Windsor Castle, Her Majesty good-naturedly teased an officer about his age. With the wit and sense of humor for which, of course, many have talked about today, when the officer told Her Majesty that he had served in the military for over 27 years, she leaned in close to the array of medals on his uniform and smiled and said, "Yes, it looks that way," bringing a moment of levity to a typically serious ceremony. And just over a year ago, Madam Speaker, as Colonel-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces legal branch, Her Majesty presented a royal banner to the branch to commemorate its 100th anniversary. Madam Speaker, royal symbolism and royal traditions are key to the activities of the Canadian Armed Forces. Under the National Defence Act, the rules and regulations that governed our military during her reign were called the Queen's Regulations and Orders, and they affected every aspect of life in uniform. Every member of the Canadian Armed Forces has sworn an oath of allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen since her ascension to the throne. And military officers receive the Queen's Commission, from which they derive their authority to command and issue orders. Canada's Navy and Air Force both bear the distinction Royal, and many Canadian Army Corps and regiments are designated Royal as well. Madam Speaker, so many military badges, medals, and insignia that adorn their uniforms, flags, equipment, and signs also bear the symbol of the crown. These are only a few examples, but the list does go on and on. The death of Her Majesty the Queen marks the end of an era. However, members of the Canadian Armed Forces will continue to personify the ideals that she represented. In the days to come, in Canada, the United Kingdom, hundreds of members of the Canadian Armed Forces will take part in parades and commemorate ceremonies to pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen and her remarkable life. And they will represent Canada and Canadians while they do so. Through her reign, Her Majesty the Queen represented the ideals held by our people in uniform: duty, compassion, and service before self. On behalf of the Minister of National Defence, the members of the Department of National Defence, and the Canadian Armed Forces, I extend my heartfelt condolences to the members of the royal family. We shall miss Her Majesty the Queen dearly, and may her life be an example for us all. Thank you, Madam Speaker.